Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. You're listening to episode 126, and I'm calling it the 411 on Metabolic Syndrome. But first, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say that I'm pretty distracted this time of year because I am recording this on October 30th, and I'm living smack dab in the middle of Salem. That's Salem, Massachusetts, and of course, where the witch hysteria all began. If you're a resident of Salem, like myself, we tend to complain about the traffic during Halloween month, and yes, it lasts a month, like New Yorkers complain about the parking. A few weekends ago, I drummed up enough courage to venture out into the scariness and walk around Salem. Salem is actually a relatively small town, and we have a pedestrian mall running smack down the center of Salem. So there's about 50,000 extra people on a typical weekend afternoon in October. So it's literally shoulder to shoulder walking around. But because I'm in a wheelchair, I'm wheeling around, saying, "Excuse me, pardon me, excuse me," as I make my way down the pedestrian mall, literally at a crawl. So there's all kinds of vendors. There's the fried dough, the candy apples, more fried dough, cotton candy, and, oh yes, fried dough. They also have t-shirts with the obligatory witch on a broomstick. Apparently she has to be on a broomstick. Even our police cars, not to be outdone, have a picture of a witch on a broomstick painted on the side of the cop car. And then we have our Dracula, the Grim Reaper, and various zombies. And then there's storytellers in costumes that will drag you around town in large groups, telling you stories about Lizzie Borden chopping her parents up with an axe, or maybe torture devices from the Spanish Inquisition. What does all this lighthearted fun have to do with the fact that 19 innocent people were falsely accused of witchcraft and killed? I don't know. But I've lived here 30 years, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. On Halloween night, right outside my window here on the Salem Common, there will be a band singing, of course, old Beatles tunes. Why not, right? Again, somehow fitting into the witch hysteria theme. Personally, I love the Beatles, and I'm looking forward to singing along to She Loves Me, Ya, Ya, Ya. I think it's 3 yeahs. I Want to Hold Your Hand. And of course, I'll be singing I Want to Hold Your Hand with the Grim Reaper on one side and the sexy zombie nurse on the other. Anyway, back to the podcast. I imagine you're wondering why we need another syndrome and another bunch of TV ads with people frolicking through the fields of grass or along the beach while possibly enduring the horrible side effects. Hard to know by looking at them. They look so darn happy taking all of those drugs. The good news is that it's not actually one new problem, but alas, the bad news is that it's actually a bunch of problems. Metabolic syndrome is described as multiple conditions linked together and generally centered around abdomen or apple type of obesity. There are usually 5 conditions linked together, and if we have 3 out of the 5, then we have metabolic syndrome. Here are the conditions. Number 1, centralized or apple-shaped obesity. And that's defined as a waist circumference of greater than 40 inches in men and greater than 35 inches in women. I am not necessarily picking on apple-shaped people. Apple the company, yes. Apple the people, no. It is just that the fat deposits around the organs create more of a problem than the fat deposits around the butt or legs. So what is obese exactly? Well, here are the definitions. A BMI of 18.5 to 25 is normal. A BMI of 25 to 30 is considered overweight. A BMI of 30 to 40 is obese. And a BMI of over 40 is morbidly obese. Now, if you're one of the 1% of people who are interested in calculating your BMI, here we go. It is your weight in pounds divided by your height in inches squared times 703. Why 703? I don't know. For example, your weight is 150 pounds. your height is 5 feet 3 inches. So it is 150 pounds divided by 63 inches squared. And then you multiply that by 703. The result is a BMI of 26.57. Now that would put you in the overweight category, but not by that much. That's not a big deal. But once you're in the obese category, you've got one of the 5 things that would put you into the metabolic syndrome category. Okay, number 2 is high blood sugar. And this is sometimes listed as insulin resistance. In other words, your body has insulin, but it's just not effective. Now, normal blood sugar is a fasting glucose of 100 or less. So 101 to 125 fasting is considered prediabetes. I bet you're thinking that a fasting sugar of 100 or less seems pretty strict. And it is. But the new goals are about prevention rather than control of the symptoms. Now, you may have heard of something called an A1C if you have diabetes. The goal for prevention of diabetes is 4.6 to 6.1. Once you have diabetes, your doctor will probably accept anything less than 7. Okay, so high sugar is one of the factors. Number 3, hypertension or high blood pressure. Now, I'm sure you know that 120/80 is what the doctors shoot for, and that would put you in the normal range. If that top number, or systolic blood pressure, is 130 or greater, that puts you in the above normal range. The second number, the diastolic blood pressure, should be less than 85. So 130/85 is your borderline, and anything above that will give you the risk factor for metabolic syndrome. Okay, number 4, triglycerides. Now, triglycerides are the storage form of fat in your fat cells and in your liver. You want less than 150. And again, these conditions go together very often. So if you have diabetes, there's a pretty good chance that your triglycerides are going to be a little high as well. So the two will come down together. Getting diabetes under control or losing just maybe, say, 10 to 20 pounds could bring these numbers into control. The 5th condition is an HDL cholesterol of lower than 40 in men and lower than 50 in women. So you want these numbers to be higher. Your doctor will probably tell you to get as close to 60 as you can. In other words, if a lot of your cholesterol is in this HDL or high-density lipoprotein fraction, then it's controlling your cholesterol by bringing it to the liver to be destroyed. So that's a good thing. Okay, so metabolic syndrome is diagnosed when you have 3 out of these 5 conditions. Basically, it's diagnosed with lab tests. It is considered a chronic condition, but I don't agree with some reports calling it incurable. That sounds like giving up, and I don't think anyone should give up. The way one relieves themselves of this condition is to simply reverse the numbers. And yes, easier said than done, I know. The things that contribute to metabolic syndrome are altogether too obvious. They include a diet that is high in saturated fat and refined processed foods. In other words, sugars, breads, sweetened cereals, and snack foods. Inactivity adds to this issue. Exercise helps that HDL and burns calories. Stress can be related to all of this because in general we don't eat as well when we are under stress. Getting a good night's sleep helps, as a person tends to stay on track with improved eating behaviors when they are relaxed and well rested. Now, here are some related conditions that, in my opinion, are not getting enough attention. One is called a fatty liver. In other words, fatty deposits inside your liver itself. The fancy term is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Fatty liver is strongly associated with insulin resistance and therefore diabetes. I've heard it said recently that just about everyone has a fatty liver now. The next line spoken should be, but why is that? Well, why indeed? Well, here is another fun fact. Fatty liver is the most common liver disease, more than cirrhosis, and it is estimated that 20 to 30% of the population in the US and England could have it. Could the Western diet have something to do with this? I think maybe. Number 2, polycystic ovary syndrome. This is not well understood, but it's basically an imbalance of hormones and a tendency to develop cysts on the ovaries. It is thought that this syndrome is partially genetic, but that stress and environmental factors, like say poor diet and pollution, could also be a factor. Another possible cause is insulin resistance, or excessive insulin production. In other words, insulin is not effective, so your body keeps pumping out more and more insulin. And that is obviously related to the overeating of carbohydrates, especially junk food. Number 3 is gallstones. There was an NIH.gov article looking at collective studies, and it determined that obese people are much more likely to get gallstones than normal weight or even overweight people. The two things they tended to have were a higher cholesterol level in the bile, and that cholesterol became part of the gallstone. And also their weight was centered around the middle of the body rather than the hips and legs. They also looked at rapid weight cycling, or losing a lot of weight quickly, followed by regaining and then losing again, and that will increase the risk of gallstones even more. I'll give you the link to that article in the show notes. Okay, number 4, breathing problems during sleep or sleep apnea. People with metabolic syndrome very often have obstructive sleep apnea to one extent or another. In fact, the most common cause of sleep apnea is excessive weight. Heavier people tend to have more tissue around the throat area. When someone falls asleep and the throat and tongue muscles are relaxed, this excess tissue can partially obstruct the airway. The good news is that it won't take much weight loss to relieve the symptoms, maybe only 10% of total weight. If you want to read more about this, I'll give you the link to that literature review from NIH. Okay, so how do we prevent or treat this metabolic syndrome? One would automatically think that the goal would be to control diabetes, and there are many medications out there that will do just that. But really, the long-term goal is to reduce the risk of ischemic heart disease, heart attacks, and strokes. And the reason for this is that most diabetics will die from heart attacks or strokes, not from diabetes itself. So we also want to prevent the onset of type 2 diabetes. Another way to translate that is to keep the A1C to 6.1 or less. Again, if you already have diabetes, the doctor may say the goal is really 7.0 or less. My personal opinion is that if you're at 7.0, maybe you should strive to get a lower number to prevent the symptoms of all of the above. So really, the overall goal is to reduce the trends of all of those numbers. And the good news is that they all come down together. If you lose weight, your triglycerides, your cholesterol, your blood sugar, your blood pressure, it all goes down. Now, if you want to raise your HDL, exercise and fish consumption would be a key ingredient there. Now, if you have diabetes or heart disease already, your doctor may put you on meds for both. And that is to prevent those events, as they call them. In other words, heart attacks or strokes. But again, I think the opinion of many people in the nutrition biz is that if what we eat got us into this metabolic syndrome predicament, what we eat can get us out of it. So in terms of treatment, my opinion is that lifestyle factors will more than likely help with both prevention and treatment. I have seen many patients try really hard to maintain dietary changes, only to go back to their previous eating habits when they are put on medication. It's basically human nature. It is truly difficult to break a habit and start a new one. Maybe it's possible that we need more time and more emphasis on making positive lifestyle changes. Because ultimately, if we give up on making changes to a healthier eating style, we may gain the weight back, and therefore the other symptoms of metabolic syndrome will creep up again. Dr. Michael Gregor has a short 4-minute video that looks into comparative studies with people on a straight American Diabetes Association diet versus a plant-based diet for diabetes. I'll give you a link in the show notes. He says that cohort population studies show that populations of people who eat a primarily plant-based diet have a much lower prevalence of getting diabetes. But the studies also show that a plant-based diet is much better at treating diabetes even after the diagnosis. I recommend that you listen to that video because it's only 4 minutes and it's interesting. He also mentions that people who are put on a plant-based diet versus a diabetic diet in the other group immediately have lowered insulin resistance and significantly lower cholesterol levels. In addition, they have a lower level of oxidative stress, and that oxidative stress level is a marker for inflammation and plaque formation on the arteries. Now, when we hear about these studies, we're thinking, could it be that people who eat a lot of plant foods are also exercising more, smoking less, drinking less alcohol, and maybe getting in less traffic jams? Possibly. Unlike rats, you can't factor out all those other lifestyle conditions. And I don't know what is the most important factor in lowering all of these numbers. But my opinion is this. Does it really matter? What works for you or anyone else is going to give you the best bet for making these lifestyle changes into lifelong habits. And that, my friends, is the most important factor. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.